Welcome back to section 2. Now, before we start, I really hope that you did your homework. It's important for us to take the knowledge and ideas that we have and put them into action. That is where change occurs. So am I hearing a yes? Good, all right? If you haven't, go back and do them again. Stop this recording, go back and do your homework and come. Today we're going to talk about culture. Now, culture is everything. It is absolutely the foundation of everything that you do. You have great culture, great things happen. You have poor cultures, poor things happen. And culture is based on a definition. And the definition I use is things that occur when no one is watching. So people do the right thing when people are watching, when they're looking around. But if no one is watching or there's no influence around them, what do they do then? That is what culture is all about. Now, for most of you, you've worked with the people that you are in your organisation with for a period of time. So you probably have a fair idea about who they are and what they stand for. The question would be, though, are those people and all those people around you, especially those decision makers, are they aligned with what the club or the organisation wants us to do? As we look at culture, we need to look at it from two different directions. The first one is people. Now, that's pretty obvious. Okay, that's the living, breathing people as opposed to the not so living, breathing people at your organisation. The other thing to remember is also the resources. How do we use resources? How do we approach them? How do we interact with them? And how do we utilise them is also an indication of culture in my mind as well. Now, we've said this in the first section, but I'm going to say it again. In regards to cultural change, no time in the last 2 decades have we had an opportunity to dramatically influence the culture in our not-for-profit organisations. People are open to change at the moment because they've just had to deal with a lot in regards to COVID and all the other bits and pieces that are happening around the world. So people are open up to it a little bit more. And if it's handled well, handled gently, then there's a very good chance people are going to stand up and go for it and implement these changes. So there's a few steps that we want to go through to really analyse in regards to how well our culture is going in regards to resources and what do we need to put in place to better position ourselves. Now, at the left-hand side of the screen, as you look at it, you'll see an incredibly important fact. Now, when we make these decisions around the questions on this slide, we need to ask ourselves the questions and answer them from real facts, not assumptions, not guesses, and not gut feels. If you don't have the facts, if you don't go out and seek the facts and make the decisions based on those, bad things will happen. Well, at the very least, you're not going to get the result that you want. And time again, over the time that I've worked with not-for-profits, I've seen people make some very serious decisions based on what they just believe. Now, the human brain isn't very good at holding on to facts and being able to make judgment around facts. It likes emotion, and that is not necessarily the best place to be. So, in regards to identifying, reviewing our culture the way it is now, and setting it up for success in the future, here are the things we want to do. The first one is about doing an impact assessment. Now, this is basically about positioning. Where are you really? It'd be very easy for you to sit back and go, oh, it's bad, finances are bad, we're really struggling this year. But the reason I say that so flippantly is that I've worked with a number of clubs just recently where I've pushed them and guided them or gently nudged them towards going and actually checking out their numbers and working out what their balance is and looking at their budget. And they've come back to me and go, well, not that bad. It's not as bad as we thought. Now, that's the important lesson that we need to learn from that is get the information in front of you. So what I mean by this first one about impact assessment is check it out. How are you really doing, really underlined, compared to this time last year? How are you doing from a financial point of view? How are you going for teams? How are you doing for communications? Are you doing better? Are you doing worse? Get a real, true feel, a true indication of where you are. The next thing you do is look at a resource review. What have you really got? What is the true resources that you have? What expenditure have you got going forward? Really, not guess, really. And once you've worked that out, go and have a chat to the local government, state sporting association. If you are one of those organisations with a loan, go and speak to them and see what they can do for you to assist you in regards to those expenditures, both short and long term. I think a lot of those organisations are very open to those conversations at the moment because they want you to succeed. They don't, from a perception point of view, they don't want to be seen as closing down really important organisations in the community as well. So it's important for you to go check it out and get a real good snapshot of where you are now and what's your expectations moving forward. Now, once you've done those two things, you then need to prioritise. What is the most important things that you should be focusing on? Where should the money be going? Are you able to put off payments for certain things for 2, 3, 5, 6 months? And the way that we do that is we compare our prioritization to our first session where we looked at what our purpose was. What are the strategies, the concepts, the actions that you need to put in place to ensure, without all the stuff on the edges, that ensures you that you move from where you are now to enhancing and delivering on your purpose? And because what we find a lot of times is that in organisations such as yours, sometimes we make those emotional decisions because it sounds like good fun or it's a good thing to do. But in doing that, it gives us a short-term pat on the back, but it doesn't really move us towards our priority. And there's a number of different things, things like quiz nights. Just because you've been doing it for 20 years doesn't mean you have to do it. Because a lot of quiz nights, if you do the financial review of them, aren't worth doing in regards to the money and the investment that you put in versus the amount of money and the investment that you get back. All right? I want you to be strict on this. Prioritize. Now, you don't get to just go bunch a few in together. I want number 1 priority, number 2 priority, number 3 priority, number 4, and keep going down the list. You don't get to do this easily. You have to make these decisions. Then we do something called the what if thens. It's called scenario planning or scenario mapping, which basically goes, okay, what happens if we get half the numbers? What do we do then? What happens if we double the numbers of players that come back to our clubs? What do we do then? What happens if we don't pay insurance versus we do pay the full insurance? What happens? You see where I'm going with this? And this is basically a risk assessment process. And what that allows you to do, once again, taking emotion out of the equation and making very good factual decisions, is to make decisions around what you will and won't, you are willing to do or you aren't willing to do. Because there are some things that would be great for the club, but the risk is too big. Or there's things that you want to do and you think the risk is big, but when you assess it, the risk is really low. Now, risk assessment in itself is a time-consuming and can be a complicated process. Can I encourage you to speak to the people at the City of Joondalup? They will help you. They will have some tools that will allow you to walk through this pretty simply. And if you've never done this before, please reach out to them rather than trying to do it yourself. Now, once you've done those steps, those 4 steps above, it's now time to put actions in place. And we put those actions in place, and once we've put those actions in place, we're going to hold each other accountable. We're going to put time frames on it to ensure that they are completed, and we're going to review them regularly. Now, this might seem a really big undertaking, but it's worth it. It's worth the investment. It's not time-consuming, it's investment. And it's really important to do. Now, once again, I've said this multiple times, I don't care if you are just restarting a club after COVID or you're just rebooting it for some other reason, or you just want to take a re-look at it. These are the steps that you want to do. Okay, promise me that you'll follow those through. But then we move on to building culture around people. Now, here's my tip on the left-hand side again. I want you to be the Zen master. Now, what does that mean? It means that you as the leader or your leadership team, your executive management committee, you have to be the coolest, calmest kids in the room for 2 reasons. Number 1 is you don't make good decisions when you're in heightened emotional states. And number 2, people are looking at you as role models and you don't want them to get the wrong idea and get to a point where they don't want to walk up to you and have those conversations with you that are important. So, from a leadership group, as an individual, as a group of people, how do we build culture through people in these times? Well, one of the first things to do is acknowledge it's challenging times. This is all not about unicorns and rainbows. It has been a challenging time. Even if you haven't felt it yourself, the people around you may, or almost guaranteed, actually I'm going to guarantee that they have. There's someone in your organisation that's really struggled with this. And this added on thing about restarting clubs and getting their kids back and all the other bits and pieces that are associated with rebooting this your organisation can be tough. But if you're wandering around with a big smile on your face and whistling the latest tune, that's not maybe not a true reflection of how you're feeling. It's okay to go, hey, you know what, team, hey, club, organisation, this has been a challenging time. And you know what? Challenges makes us stronger and we're going to move forward. And I know, most of my time now is spent in leadership development. I know that sometimes people look at leaders and they go, oh, they've got it all going on. But if if leaders have this vulnerability where they go and go, you know what, it has been tough. People acknowledge that they're human and that they have other people feeling the way they have. All right? You don't have to bang on about it all the time, but just highlight it once or twice in your email or in newsletters or when you talk to people, and people really appreciate it. One of the really cool things that you can do right now, in the time, for whatever reason you're doing this workshop now, is to relook at the behaviours in regards to what you want people to behave like now and in the future. We have to spend time in any organisation in any shape or form and have conversations around how we expect people to behave. There's so much diversity around, which is fantastic, but at the same time, diversity gets different points of view. So we have to get some commonality around the behaviours. Now, what I mean by behaviours now and in the future is more in the now is highlighting behaviours we'll not accept. Because people are challenged, people are scared, people are nervous, they're going to react in certain ways, and we don't want them to do that. So as a club, you need to highlight the behaviours you will and won't accept, and then hold people accountable for those. Okay? And you've got codes of conduct. Sport have used codes of conduct. If you're not a sporting organisation in this webinar, then go and steal it from the sports. They're very flexible. They can be used across any not-for-profit organisation where they clearly identify not only what behaviours we want people to undertake, e.g. respect, integrity, etc., but also it indicates what happens if you don't. Really important. One of the really interesting things in regards to the way that people react in times of nervousness, fear, confusion, is they'll ask questions and 10 seconds later they'll come back and ask the same question. Their brain isn't processing normally. So one of the things that you'll have to understand that you'll have to do as one of the leaders, as one of the go-to points and the contact points at your organisation, is that you're going to have to be okay with repeating the same message over and over again. Now, we want you to do that proactively, so you repeat the messages in your emails, in your newsletters, on your website, and repeat it over and over again. But also be prepared to also repeat the answer to certain questions from even the same person. They're not being a pain in the backside. They're not being annoying. What they're trying to do is deal with the situation of unknown and in time of change, and therefore they're just trying to reassure themselves about the answers that they're getting. So it's frustrating for leaders. It can be really frustrating, but it's an important skill. One of the most important things in times of reboot, rechange, or just change in general is having a really clear communication strategy. And what you'll have to do is it is a good time to check in on how you communicate with your people. And one of the things I'd really suggest in any time, but in times that you're experiencing right now, is I'd really like you to do a couple of things. The first thing is just choose what communication tools that you will be using. Now, in this day and age, we could get 5, 10, 15, 20 of them. My suggestion is select a smaller amount of communication tools, maybe website, email, Facebook. You can choose whatever you like, whatever's best for your clientele, but choose less and use the tools a lot better and get your messages stronger rather than trying to get your message out across 15 different platforms. And also, the tip number 2 is only have a few people, maybe 1 or 2 people, that send out information to your members and your stakeholders. Rather than having 10 people on a committee sending messages out or answering questions on Facebook, really zoom in as representatives of your organisation to answer those questions. It could be whoever you choose, but reduce the number. The reason you want to do that is because it also reduces the chance of us getting answers and telling people, our members, the wrong thing, which just leads to even more confusion. And the final one in regards to building your culture around people, you have to be available. One of the biggest mistakes I see in not-for-profits all the way through to some of the largest organisations I work with is that leaders or the executive group come out into their world, they talk to the stakeholders, which could be shareholders through to parents and community members for the work that we're doing right here, and they'll announce the changes or they'll introduce something, and then they'll disappear. And they're not disappearing for any other reason except, hey, I've delivered the message, I'm now off to do more work. One of the things you have to do if you're going to make some changes or rectify or modify things is once you deliver the message of change, you have to stick around. And you have to be there and be available for people to be able to contact, to talk to, ask those questions multiple times. And as you are being available, it's okay to check in and look at what you're doing and go, hey, is this the best way of doing it? I've been at work with one national sporting organisation where they did this massive restructure on how they were going to deliver their sport, and the CEO jumped on a FaceTime or a webinar or something like that and announced what he was going to do, and then sat on the webinar for the next 2 hours and just answered questions. And he did that weekly for the next 6 months. Now, sometimes no one showed up and no one asked any questions, but other times there was lots. But the fact that he kept turning up and answering those questions, it got the message out, but also reduced all those gossip things that occur in times of change. So there you go. There's some tips. Remember to be a Zen master, and there's some tips and some ideas that you have to put in place to ensure that you're building that culture. You're holding onto the culture and building it even further if you've got a nice sound culture already. So let's finish off this section with some homework. I would like you to grab a piece of paper and I want you to answer those 2 questions. What is the one thing your organisation must focus on around resources to get it really spot on and really focused? And number 2, what is the one thing your organisation must focus on around developing people and its culture associated with that? This is an opportunity for you just to select 2. You can select more if you want, but I'd rather you select a small amount and do it well than a whole stack of different things. So what are they going to be? Write it down. Commit yourself and go out and do it. All right, I hope you enjoyed that section. I'm going to wind up now. I will see you in a few moments on the next section.